The stars had never looked so cold. Grand Admiral Vethkalos stood at the observation window of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, and watched the sensor display paint its picture of the battlefield ahead. 5 human ships. 5. He had brought 412 warships, dreadnoughts, battlecruisers, destroyers, the full might of the Calorian Third Expansion Fleet, and the humans had sent 5 destroyers to meet them. He almost felt insulted. "Admiral," said his tactical officer, Sub-Commander Driel, with barely concealed amusement. "Human vessels have acknowledged our presence. They are not retreating." "Of course they aren't." Vethkalos clasped his 4-fingered hands behind his back. "They're humans. They never retreat. It's a cultural deficiency." He studied the 5 blips on the sensor display. Destroyers, according to the classification data, the smallest warship class the humans operated. Long, narrow vessels, built for speed rather than firepower. Each one displaced perhaps 80,000 tons. His flagship alone displaced 40 million. What are their names? Driel checked the intelligence feeds. The Carthage, the Thermopylae, the Stalingrad, the Alamo, and the Masada. Vethkalos tilted his head. "Those are all battles where humans lost." "Yes, Admiral." A beat of silence stretched across the bridge. "Strange choice of names," Vethkalos said finally. He shrugged 4 shoulders. "No matter. Open a channel. I'll give them the traditional offer of surrender. We're not barbarians." The channel opened with a crisp click. "Human vessels, this is Grand Admiral Vethkalos of the Calorian Third Expansion Fleet. You are outgunned 412 to 5. You are outmassed by a factor of 10,000. I am extending to you the courtesy of surrender. Lay down your weapons, transmit your command codes, and your lives will be spared. You have 90 seconds to comply." The response came immediately. No 90-second delay. Not even a 10-second delay. The voice was female, calm, almost bored. "Admiral Vethkalos, this is Commodore Elena Vasquez, commanding Destroyer Squadron 9. We've received your offer." A pause. "We're going to decline." Vethkalos blinked. "You understand the tactical situation?" "Completely. We've been watching your fleet for 6 hours. You've got 412 warships, including 40 dreadnoughts, 80 battlecruisers, and the rest a mix of support and screening elements. Your flagship is the Eternal Dominion, 40 million tons, energy shield capacity rated at 0.7 petajoules, primary armament 8 plasma lance batteries." Another pause. "We know exactly what you brought, Admiral. That's why we only needed 5. The channel closed. Vethkalos stared at the display for a long moment. Then he turned to Driel. "Begin the advance. All ships, combat formation Sigma. I want those destroyers eliminated in the first exchange." "Yes, Admiral." Estimated engagement time at current approach velocities, 22 minutes. "Good." Vethkalos settled into his command throne. "Let's end this quickly. I have a planet to claim." The Eternal Dominion led the fleet forward, 400 warships spreading into a classic wedge formation, energy shields shimmering as they powered to full capacity. On the sensor display, the 5 human destroyers held their position, making no evasive maneuvers, no attempts to scatter or flee. They sat in a tight cluster at a distance of 800,000 kilometers, perfectly stationary. "Waiting. They're not moving," Driel reported. "No active weapon signatures. Shields appear to be at minimum power. Bizarre." Vethkalos leaned forward. "Are they malfunctioning?" "Possibly. Or this is a psychological tactic. Showing fearlessness to demoralize us." "Demoralize us." Vethkalos made the Calorian equivalent of a laugh. "With 5 ships against 400. He shook his head. Bring us to firing range. The plasma lances will, Admiral. The sensor officer's voice carried a new note. Something tight. I'm detecting additional contacts. Vethkalos sat up straight. Where? Everywhere, sir. The display exploded with new signatures. Not around the 5 destroyers. Behind his fleet. Flanking his fleet. Inside his fleet's formation, emerging from sensor shadows that the Calorian passive detection systems hadn't flagged because they were looking at the 5 obvious contacts ahead. The new ships were smaller than the destroyers, much smaller, but there were thousands of them. Tens of thousands. Tiny, fast-moving contacts that had been hiding in the electromagnetic wake of his own warship's shield emissions. What are those? Vethkalos whispered. Drones, sir. Combat drones. Human design. Driel's voice had gone strange. We're reading approximately 47,000 individual contacts. The first strike hit before anyone could give an order. It didn't come from the drones. It came from the 5 destroyers, still sitting calmly at 800,000 kilometers. The sensors registered the launch, not energy signatures, not plasma, not anything the Calorian threat assessment protocols were calibrated to detect as dangerous. The launch signatures read as inert. Mass driver rounds. Solid projectiles with no explosive payload, no guidance systems, no electronic countermeasures to jam. Sub-Commander Driel actually laughed. Kinetic rounds? Admiral, they're shooting rocks at us. Our shields will. The Kethvalor, a battlecruiser holding position at the left flank of the fleet formation, simply ceased to exist. Not an explosion in the traditional sense. The kinetic penetrators, 30-centimeter tungsten rods fired at 0.31 times the speed of light, passed through the Kethvalor's energy shield as if it weren't there, because energy shield stopped energy, and a tungsten rod moving at 90,000 kilometers per second was not energy. It was mass. It was physics. It was the oldest weapon in the universe wearing a modern uniform. The Kethvalor came apart at the seams as 6 consecutive impacts turned its reactor housing into shrapnel and its crew of 800 into vapor. The bridge of the Eternal Dominion went absolutely silent. Vethkalos watched the sensor ghost of the Kethvalor fade from the display. His mouth worked. Nothing came out. Admiral. Driel's voice was barely a whisper. Our shields, they're not stopping the projectiles. I see that. The human kinetic weapons, they're bypassing our entire defense architecture. I see that too. What are your orders, sir? Vethkalos took a breath. He was a veteran of 11 expansion campaigns. He had never lost a ship in direct combat. Not one. The Kethvalor had carried 800 Calorians. In 4 seconds. Without warning. He forced his mind to work. Scatter formation. Get ships moving, make us harder to target. Launch all fighters. Have the screening destroyers advance on those drones. The drones are already engaging, sir. The display had become a nightmare. 47,000 human combat drones, each one small enough that Calorian point defense systems were treating them as low-priority targets, were threading through the fleet formation like water through mesh. They weren't attacking yet. They were positioning. Moving to specific coordinates with precise, coordinated purpose, as if following a plan that had been calculated long before this battle began. Because it had, some part of Vethkalos understood. The humans had been watching his fleet for 6 hours. They knew exactly where every ship was, exactly what its shield profile looked like, exactly how his formation would respond to the kinetic strike. They had positioned 47,000 drones in the electromagnetic shadow of his own fleet, and he hadn't seen a single one of them. The Stalingrad fired next. Then the Carthage. Then all 5 destroyers simultaneously, a coordinated barrage that sent hundreds of kinetic penetrators screaming through the void at relativistic velocity. Veth Kalos watched 3 more battlecruisers die in seconds. The Orn Pestalis. The glory of expansion. The third celestial mandate, that one had taken the admiral of his second battle group, 600 years old, a decorated hero of 4 campaigns. Gone. In a flash of expanding gas and hull fragments. Return fire. Veth Kalos slammed his fist on the command console. All plasma lance batteries, target those destroyers. Maximum output. Yes, Admiral. Opening fire. The plasma lances of 40 dreadnoughts fired simultaneously, 400 gigajoule beams of superheated matter crossing 800,000 kilometers in a little over 2.5 seconds. It was the most destructive single-weapon salvo in the history of the Calorian expansion. It could have cracked a moon. It hit the 5 human destroyers head-on. All 5 ships were still there afterward. That's impossible, Driel said. Our plasma lances should have, they moved, the sensor officer reported, voice shaking. All 5 ships executed lateral burns in the 2.5 seconds the plasma took to cross the range. They moved after we fired, calculated the exact angle to avoid, they predicted our targeting solutions. Veth Kalos felt something cold settling in his chest. Not fear. He told himself it wasn't fear. Their computer systems are fast enough to analyze our weapons lock and calculate evasion vectors in real time. Sir. Driel turned from her console, and her 4 eyes were wide with something Veth Kalos had never seen in a Calorian officer's face before. We've just lost communications with the 7th Battle Group. What happened? The drones, sir. They've activated. He looked at the display. The 47,000 contacts had stopped positioning. They had started firing. Not at the warships, not yet. At the communication relays. At the fleet sensor arrays. At the precise junctions where damage would fracture the Calorian command network and turn 412 coordinated warships into 412 isolated, panicking vessels each fighting their own private battle. The humans hadn't just studied his fleet. They had modeled his entire command structure and designed a weapon to dismantle it piece by piece. The Thermopylae spoke for the first time. The signal cut through on the emergency frequency, broadcast on all channels, Calorian and human both. A different voice this time, deeper, male, carrying the particular texture of someone who had done this before and found it routine. This is Captain James Okafor of the destroyer Thermopylae. To any Calorian vessel that's still receiving, you have approximately 4 minutes before our drone network completes the isolation protocol. After that, every ship in your fleet will be fighting blind and deaf. I'm offering you 1 chance, 1, not 2, to transmit a fleet-wide stand-down order. Your ships stop moving. Your weapons power down. You live. A pause that felt almost surgical. Clocks running, Admiral. Veth Kalos opened a fleet-wide channel. This is Grand Admiral Veth Kalos. All ships, ignore the human transmission. Execute emergency formation Omega, concentrate firepower on, he stopped. Because the display was showing him something he couldn't immediately process. The human destroyers were no longer sitting still. They were moving. And not retreating, advancing. 5 80,000-ton destroyers accelerating directly toward the heart of his 400-ship fleet, closing at 40,000 kilometers per second, still firing continuous kinetic barrages, and as they came they were also launching something else. Smaller projectiles. Slower. Spinning. What are those? He heard himself ask. Nobody answered for 3 seconds. Then the sensor officer spoke in a voice she was clearly trying very hard to keep steady. Nuclear warheads, sir. Approximately 400 individual devices, yields ranging from 50 to 200 megatons. The bridge erupted. Vethkalos heard his officers talking, shouting, calling damage reports from ships he could no longer reach through the fracturing communication net. He forced himself to focus on the display. The nuclear devices were spreading out, not targeting individual ships, but positioning themselves in a three-dimensional grid pattern around the fleet formation. Surrounding it. Not to destroy ships. To corral them. "They're hurting us," Vethkalos said slowly. "The nuclear devices create a threat perimeter. Any ship that breaks the formation boundary risks detonation. They're keeping us clustered together so the kinetic rounds and drones can." The Eternal Dominion shuddered. His ship. His 40-million-ton flagship, built to the finest specifications of Calorian military engineering, designed to absorb the fire of a dozen lesser navies, it shuddered like a living thing struck by an unexpected blow. Alarms began to sound. "Hull breach, decks 12 through 17, the damage control officer shouted. "Reactor 2 at 60% and dropping. They hit our secondary power coupling." "How?" Vethkalos demanded. "We're 200,000 kilometers from the destroyers." "It wasn't the destroyers, sir. It was a drone. Single drone, massed approximately 800 kilograms, accelerated to impact velocity by a mass driver on the Carthage. It bypassed our point defense because it read as debris." The officer looked up. "They're using the drones as kinetic impactors, sir. Flying them directly into our ships at terminal velocity." Vethkalos looked at the display. 47,000 drones. Each one 800 kilograms. Each one a potential kinetic impactor. His point defense systems could handle missiles, guided, electronically active, identifiable threats. They were not calibrated for 47,000 small, cold, nearly radar-invisible objects that could be repurposed into bullets at a moment's notice. He had brought 412 warships to kill 5 human destroyers. The humans had brought 5 destroyers and turned his 412 warships into the ammunition. The Alamo and the Masada had split from the main formation, curving wide around the flanks of his fleet on parallel intercept courses. As they ran the flanks, they fired not at the warships but at the communication relay ships. The fleet's nervous system, the vessels whose destruction was turning his armada into a panicking mob. They moved with casual precision, the destroyers, slipping between plasma lance salvos with those maddening, computer-calculated lateral burns, taking hit after hit on their own shields. Their shields were taking plasma lance fire and holding, somehow, their shield technology different from Calorian assumptions, layered and adaptive and apparently capable of absorbing far more punishment than his intelligence files had suggested. Captain Vasquez's voice again on the command channel. "Admiral, your fleet has now lost coherent communication with approximately 60% of your ships. We're reading 17 warships destroyed, 43 reporting significant damage, and your drone suppression has failed across the board. This stops whenever you want." Vethkalos watched the display. 17 ships. 17, he checked, 11 minutes of engagement. He had come here expecting to lose nothing. He had expected to open fire, watch 5 human ships evaporate, and proceed to the planet. Instead, he had lost 17 warships and the tactical coherence of his entire fleet, and the 5 human destroyers were still out there, still moving, still firing, running parallel orbits through his formation like wolves through a cattle pen, and each pass cost him ships. "Battle Group 7, respond," he said into the dead channel. Nothing. Battle Group 7. Nothing. Gone. Isolated or destroyed, he couldn't tell which, and that uncertainty was somehow worse than confirmed losses. The Carthage made its run. He watched it happen on the display because he couldn't look away. The Carthage, 80,000 tons, accelerating to maximum combat speed, came in from the high oblique angle at 0.08 times the speed of light and ran straight through the center of his fleet's formation. Not around it. Through it. It was firing in every direction simultaneously, its railguns cycling at maximum rate, kinetic penetrators going left and right and forward and aft, hitting 6 different ships on a single pass, and his fleet was firing back with everything: plasma lances, particle beams, anti-ship missiles, point defense cannons. And the Carthage was taking all of it, its shields absorbing and redistributing, its hull reading damage on multiple decks, and it didn't stop, didn't slow, didn't deviate, it just kept coming through at maximum speed and came out the other side of his fleet's formation trailing atmosphere and hull fragments and still accelerating. The transmission from the Carthage's captain was brief. Splash 6. Turning for second pass. Helm, come to bearing 277. Weapons, reload tubes 1 through 40. Let's do it again. Again, Vethkalos said, to no one. Sir, Driel said, and her voice had changed completely. All professionalism, all composure gone. She just sounded afraid. Sir, we have to leave. He turned to look at her. His second in command, 15 years of service, a decorated veteran of 8 campaigns. Afraid. We came with 412 ships, he said. We came with 412 ships against 5 destroyers, she said, and we're losing. We are losing, Admiral. 23 ships destroyed now, the communication net is gone, the nuclear corral is tightening, and the drones are starting their final positioning cycle. She gestured at the display. They planned this entire engagement before we dropped out of transit. We're not fighting a battle, we're trapped in a machine the humans built to destroy us. I will not, Admiral. She leaned close, for eyes direct and unwavering. Those destroyers are named after battles where humans lost. Do you understand what that means? They named their ships after their own defeats. They memorized every battle they ever lost and named war machines after them. What kind of species does that? Silence. Outside the observation window, a Calorian battlecruiser was dying, the Starcrown of Keth, her hull venting fire and air, tumbling slowly end over end as secondary explosions walked down her spine. Vethkalos had known the captain for 60 years. They had served together in the second expansion. Fleet-wide order, he said quietly. All ships, disengage. Reverse heading, maximum acceleration. Transit jump as soon as drives are ready. Driel's breath went out of her in a long, shaking exhale. Yes, Admiral. The order went out, or tried to. The ships that could still receive it began turning. Others, already isolated by the communication blackout, were left to fight on alone or find their own way out. Vethkalos watched the display with the attention of a man cataloging his failures. 26 ships destroyed now. 30. The drones were not letting the retreating ships go without a toll, pursuing them, flying kamikaze intercepts, not enough to stop the retreat but enough to make it costly. The 5 destroyers did not pursue. They held position at the center of the battlefield, watching the Calorian fleet scatter and jump and flee in whatever directions their damaged drives could manage, and they said nothing. They just held position, steady and still, the way they had been still at the beginning before the blood started flowing. Captain Okafor came on the channel one more time. His voice carried neither triumph nor cruelty. Just a flat, measured calm that was somehow worse than either. Fleet telemetry shows your survivors are in transit or retreating to safe jump distance. We're not going to chase you. A pause. When you make your report, Admiral, be accurate. Tell them exactly what happened here. Tell them it was 5 ships. Tell them we'd been watching for 6 hours. Tell them we knew every ship class, every shield rating, every formation preference. And tell them, another pause, briefer, tell them we named our ships after battles we lost, because we remember every one of them, and we learn from every one of them, and we don't make the same mistake twice. The channel closed. The Eternal Dominion made its jump coordinates and fled. The after-action analysis, compiled 4 days later by Calorian strategic intelligence officers who had access to the full sensor records, was a document that circulated through the highest levels of Calorian military command with a classification level that had no precedent. The numbers were not disputed. The Third Expansion Fleet had entered the engagement with 412 warships. 38 had been destroyed outright, with total crew losses of approximately 31,000. 67 had sustained moderate to severe damage. 11 were unaccounted for. Communication loss during the retreat meant they had either fled in random directions or were debris. The 5 human destroyers had survived. All 5. The Carthage had lost most of a deck to plasma lance hits. The Stalingrad had reported crew casualties of 17 personnel. The others had taken shield damage, hull scoring, minor system failures. 17 human casualties. 31,000 Calorian. The officer who wrote the final assessment report, a senior analyst named Felorin, who was known for precise, unemotional language, ended the document with a single paragraph that deviated from standard format. It was the paragraph that got quoted in every internal briefing for the next 3 years. We entered this engagement with a force superiority of 82 to 1. We assumed that ratio reflected our tactical advantage. We now understand we were measuring the wrong variable. The humans did not send 5 destroyers because 5 destroyers were all they had. They sent 5 destroyers because 5 destroyers were all they needed. The difference between those two statements is the entirety of what we failed to understand, and what we must reckon with before any further expansion toward human-controlled space is considered. We have fought species with larger fleets. We have fought species with more powerful weapons. We have never fought a species that turned the size of our fleet into a disadvantage. Recommend all expansion operations toward the Sol system be suspended indefinitely pending complete strategic reassessment. The report was classified. The recommendation was debated for months. But the 38 wrecks of Calorian warships, tumbling in the cold dark at the edge of human space, were not classified. They were a message that every ship captain in the sector could read on their sensors. A message written not in words but in debris fields and hull fragments and the slow, silent rotation of dead ships in the void. Commodore Elena Vasquez read the intelligence summary of the Calorian response 6 weeks later, sitting in her cabin aboard the Carthage while the repair crews worked on the deck below. She read Felorin's final paragraph twice. Then she set the report down and looked out her porthole at the stars. Somewhere out there, the Calorian Empire was having a meeting about humanity. About what humanity was. About what it meant that 5 human ships had done what 5 human ships had done. She hoped the meeting was uncomfortable. She hoped it was long. And she hoped that every admiral and fleet commander who attended it understood, in their bones, what the names on her ship's hulls were meant to say. Not a boast. Not a threat. Just a simple, honest statement about the nature of the species they had decided to challenge. We remember every battle we lost. We carry every defeat with us. And we come back. The Carthage's intercom pinged. Her executive officer's voice. Commodore, engineering says the deck repairs are complete. We're at full combat readiness. Vasquez closed the intelligence report. Good, she said. Tell the squadron to stay sharp. Something tells me the Calorians are going to want a second opinion. She almost smiled. Let them come.